more today. The next presentation is going to be a trip report by Charlie Prochnow and his friends Zane Kettner and Chris Moss. Or is it Mouse? Moss? Okay, so they're going to talk about a trip they took to Mount St. Elias and their ambitions for what they wanted to do, the conditions that they found, and the group decisions that they made. If you want to know more, Charlie has written a longer account of that trip that is published in this month's Scree magazine in your inbox or your mailbox. So for a little bit of background information about these three gentlemen, Dane, Chris, and Charlie are all self-proclaimed Chugach enthusiasts and weekend warriors. When they are not working their day jobs, Dane as a geologist, Chris as an engineer, and Charlie in family medicine, they can be found gallivanting through the Chugach, preferably on skis. They all agree that there is no greater joy in the world than calm, windless powder in the range.
Sweet. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out, and thanks to everyone for giving us the time to talk. Dane, Chris, and I had this expedition planned for this last May. We went from late May to early June, and kind of each of us have been on this process of like slowly pushing ourselves in the mountains further and further each year, trying kind of harder and harder challenges, and this was kind of our next step. And we had a lot of fun. We saw some really beautiful terrain, and we ran into some pretty considerable challenges to what Dr. Stern was talking about as the very rapidly evolving nature of the snowpack that we were climbing on. And so we want to show some photos of our trip, raise some snow for the high mountains, but also kind of reflect on some of the decisions and how they made. We definitely found ourselves in a spot that we couldn't undo on descent, and that was kind of the first time that happened to all of us. So we'll dive a little more into that as we go. And here are our first photo here. You're kind of seeing the full prominence of the mountain as we started. Mount St. Elias has been climbed many, many times, and it's been climbed from the ocean many times before as well. And some of you guys that ski a lot might know it's never been skied from the summit to the ocean. There is one group that skied the whole mountain in 2 separate trips, but it's never been done in a full push. And we certainly weren't ambitious enough to want to try to do that. But we were there to push ourselves. We were there to kind of to see what we could put together. And we definitely wanted the adventure of climbing from the beach and starting at sea level and trying to get as high as we could on the mountain. We started this trek. The original plan was to start from Yakutat. The logistics were such that from Yakutat you can take a helicopter straight to the head of Tan Fjord by the Trindell Glacier, and that cuts off about 7 miles of walking. When we arrived in Yakutat, we found out that our pilot had crashed his otter about an hour before we arrived there, and that he would not be flying us. So we kind of hung out in Yakutat with all of our gear and found alternate plans. We ended up flying back the next day to Anchorage, changing the oil in Dane's truck rapidly, and then driving out to McCarthy and camping there for a bit until we found Paul Klaus to fly us out Ultima Thule. The Super Cub that he landed in couldn't get us to the head of the bay, so he landed us about 7 miles back along the beach. And so you can see us kind of walking this first section of the beach, which ended up being a blessing because this was one of the coolest parts of the trip. I'm going to kind of move us quickly through some photos and kind of some maps to give you guys an idea of what it was we were climbing. And then we'll pause and discuss kind of more some of the challenges and more difficult situations that we found along the route. So just a kind of an overview of our route here. You can see our landing strip at the very end of Tan Fjord, which pops off of Icy Bay. And we walked along the coast for a ways and then made our way in a really quick push, just a kind of a 24-hour push to our camp at 3,000 feet. And that's where the steep climbing begins. And most of the difficulties of the climb, technical difficulties of the climb, happen between 3,000 and 8,000 feet, and we'll talk a little more about those routes. That's where we ran into trouble in descent. And then there's some steeper sections towards the summit, which we didn't quite hit. Our high point was just shy of 17,000 feet. That's where we ended up deciding to turn around, so we didn't quite make our summit push. And you can see a map of the route, the difficulties between 3,000 and 8,000 feet. there's 3 standard routes that people have used to access the South Ridge from 3,000 foot camp. And you can kind of see them all boxed in here. There's the Harvard route, which was the original scent route in the early 1900s. And that route is mostly low 5th class rock with some steep snow. There's the Shale Ridge route, which if any of you guys have seen the Smileys video, you'll have seen videos of them ascending the Shale Ridge, which is a mix of 60-degree snow with some 5th class rock pitches. And then there's the Milk Jug Couloir, the farthest north on our map there, which is steep 60-ish degree snow or ice, depending on, or rock, I guess, depending on the time of year, couloir. That's technically easier than the rest of the routes, but is challenged by rockfall, and we'll talk about that danger a bit here. So we chose the Milk Jug Couloir as our route. So we'll talk about those sections kind of in more detail as we get to it. So the highlight for us was moving along the beach. It was beautiful. The Trimdal Glacier is calving into the ocean the whole time we were walking. Sometimes we were along the coast, we had to move quickly up to avoid some waves created by the larger ice pieces calving off. So this was really cool and beautiful, and we definitely started the trip in t-shirt and shorts before getting real cold at the top. Here we are moving up and down along benches to make our way across the coast above the glacier. And once we got to about 1,000 feet, we started seeing terrain like this, which was where our snow line started. These are a couple smaller glaciers that we crossed heading to the 3,000 foot camp. Once we got to 3,000 feet, we set up a base camp, and Paul met us with his Super Cub in this very nice bough branch that he left us to mark our cache. He dropped off some supplies that kind of prevented us from having to double carry that first long section. We made that in one push, and then he dropped off the rest of our cache and supplies. We had about 15 days of supplies, so it was definitely more than we could carry in a load on the way in. And once we reached 3,000 feet, the real climbing kind of began for us. And this is a view of what we were looking at, and it actually shows all 3 routes in pretty good view. I'm going to look back so I can toggle the mouse to the correct location, but I'm not going to be able to. But if you look on the ridge up to the looker's right, you can see the Harvard route. The exposed rock there are the 5th class pitches, and it's deceiving here, but the upper reaches of that approach 60 degrees, so they're steeper than they look. And then just down and left from the cursor there where Danny's got it, that's the Shale Ridge route. And so yeah, you can kind of see the mixed 5th class steep snow. And then the Milk Jug Couloir is kind of barely in view along the left side there. Do you think you can toggle it over there? It's small enough, I'm not going to describe it there. That's it right there, yeah. So you can see kind of a rock pitch in the middle. There's a big birch at the bottom, which you might not be able to see, and some steep starting at 45 and maybe getting to about 60 degrees at the steepest snow and ice climbing. So yeah, those are kind of the 3 routes. You can see them in pretty good view. We started double carrying here, and we were moving at night with the early May sun and temps. The time that we had available based on the snow conditions to travel were between about 10 p.m. And maybe 8 a.m. And around 8 a.m. it started getting a little bit too mushy to do anything safely. So we were kind of transitioning to night ops and moving at night and trying to sleep in the day. But we were getting good freezes at night when we were down here, and we were finding good frozen snow in the mornings and cold enough temps to get the snow frozen. I'll go back to the Shale Ridge. We found out pretty quickly that the Shale Ridge wasn't really going to be an option for ascending. The snow there had a lot more rock near the surface, and the sun warming the rocks kind of melted the snow out from the bottom, and we found this like trapped crust with kind of endless rotted out snow below it on that ridge, and anywhere where we were close to rocks, and it was pretty much impossible to move. Even moving along the flat sections of the ridge took us quite a long time to even move a couple hundred yards. So that once it was steepened up, that was deemed unprotectable and really impossible for us to climb safely, not because of the rock, but because of the snow conditions. Here's a view of us looking up that Milk Jug Couloir. This was our first attempt. This photo was taken around like 6 in the morning or so, and it looks pretty inviting, pretty chill. Now, it certainly wasn't that way. And you can see the rockfall hazard. These rocks here, as soon as they hit the sun, start shedding rocks and all falling down the couloir. This is our first attempt, and we learned quickly that this was too late in the day to be starting at 6 a.m. The first attempt, Dane and I both had rocks pass very, very closely to our heads, kind of suddenly as soon as the rocks hit. It was around 7 or 7:30 in the morning. And we ended up retreating, hiding in the birch run for a little bit, dumping our gear, and coming back earlier the next day to successfully ascend. This short little tiny rock in the middle there actually was a pretty formidable little spot. We ended up pitching that out, and there was a couple kind of shoulder-high rock ice moves we had to make there. The only part that we ended up kind of belaying and pitching on that ascent. But the snow we found here was frozen. It was hard, it was firm, took a crampon and an ice axe very well on the ascent, even though you can see that clearly the spring's been doing its work on the snowpack here. Here's a view looking down the milk jug from, I think this is actually right from the top. I think Chris took this photo. I think that's me climbing up past him. This was on our ascent today. And I'll let Chris kind of describe the up mountain here.
This is our little tent platform at 8,000 feet, roughly, kind of surrounded by crevasses, and I think this is actually just seasonal snow where we're standing here. Beautiful spot though. It's pretty deep and didn't have much room elsewhere for a tent platform. It was surprisingly steep in all directions, and actually right behind us there was a little band of rock, and then pretty much dove off about 4,000 feet down. We were able to rest and then start pretty early next day and do a single carry up to 10,000 foot. We cached quite a bit of food and fuel up there. And this was actually probably the best skiing of the whole trip. We had from the 10,000 foot snow dome down back to our 8,000 foot camp. Really beautiful setting, very memorable skiing. You can see our tent perched right down there. Super cool ridge, great spot to go use the restroom if you will. Yeah, so next day, I should say we had to get up that from 8,000 to 10,000 foot, which is where this photo was taken pretty early in the morning because that slope was surprisingly steep. I don't know a good angle off the top of my head, but you had to travel pretty early without punching in. So we got up, cached, and picked up more of our cache from the day before and kept moving. This is looking obviously towards the summit and approaching the kind of the Hayden Ridge Traverse. Each of these little sections kind of presented more challenge than we initially thought they would, and looking up from our lower camps at this Ridge Traverse was definitely a little bit exciting, not really knowing how far out those cornices were, and we ended up traversing across pretty low out of concern for that. And it's definitely a no-fall zone, probably a couple thousand feet down to the glacier below. There's kind of a boat of us traversing there. We elected to just cramp on this, definitely not something you would want to do with skis on or ski crampons. This is looking back across after already having crossed the Hayden Traverse under Hayden Peak. Heavily crevassed. As we started out onto the slope, it was cold snow. I think this is actually the leopard skin that you're talking about. And we didn't get very far out. It's pretty steep in this whole slope above us. About this point, we experienced some lumping and maybe a collapsing. And that kind of alarmed us. We had quite a long discussion, probably an hour or two, and we kind of went back out, dug some pits, and did some examining, and ultimately determined that it was actually a snow bridge collapsing, not a hang fire slope that was almost to the point of turning us around completely. So that was kind of one of the first major decision points of the trip after the initial ascent of the milk jug being kind of the first crux. But yeah, we made it across and Dane built us a nice snow cave while Charlie and I went back. I think that's what this photo is, heading back across to go pick up the rest of our food and fuel. So we ended up doing this twice in the same day. Cool shot of the snow camp. This is looking down towards the Col at 10,000 feet. So you can see our snow cave down there, right in this little spot. So you can see the crevasse fields, and traversing parallel to them is kind of a little unnerving, but I think this is probably around 12,000 feet or so on our way up to 13 camp. One thing I'll mention is pretty fascinating is the winds would really rip through this col and actually blow this dust, this green, and deposit it kind of all across here. When we went back down to our coal camp there, everything was coated in this like green dust. It was super melted out from the solar radiation hitting that dust. Charlie and I climbing up, we had really good conditions for the upper mountain. Nothing really to complain about. Beautiful, beautiful scenery. Here's our 13 camp, perched on a little shoulder. We had probed while roped up quite a bit in about 24-inch intervals and determined it to be safe. As soon as we unroped, I plunged in up to my waist on about a 12-inch wide crack that was just straight down. So that was kind of a reminder that even when you probe at 24 inches, you can still fall in. So, yeah. This is a good shot. I'll pause here. This is the upper middle mountain, I guess, from 13,000. This plateau up here is around 15,500-ish. And this bowl here is pretty heavily crevassed. It's kind of hard to see from this photo, but this is incredibly steep skiing. That was the most exciting skiing I think I've ever done. This is on our summit day. We took a rest day when we ended up getting to 13 camp and then trying to go for an early push. We had pretty much perfect weather forecast. We were getting daily forecast from a meteorologist in Colorado who does this for a small fee. Very reliable. And this was the first cloudy day we really had. Kind of caught us by surprise. And you can kind of see the clouds building there. We made a really good time getting up to about 16.5. We hit, kind of the other challenge of the trip was gear selection. We had kind of mixed reviews from the last two parties, the Smileys and Greg and Brett, who had climbed it last year. We had, I think, 4 pickets, some screws, some various rock gear for the lower mountain, but discovered pretty quickly that we were a little ill-equipped for the upper summit ice field. Was got to be skiable, but it was really just kind of a mix of nev and ice that was really unsupportable for screws, and we didn't have enough pickets to really do meaningful running belays. So we started pitching it out and moving too slowly, ended up getting caught in a bit of a storm, and we decided to pull the plug on 16.5. And we, on the way down, kind of waited. We did not wand that crevasse field, which was a mistake. That was one big lesson learned. Ended up waiting for a few hours because it's essentially white out and blowing snow, so you couldn't really see the track super well. Ended up making the call to just proceed down and tried to track, like just looking for any signs of our route. We ended up using our watches and the phone with the Gaia GPS tracks on it. And made it down below the cloud, which was a relief. This is a cool shot of, this is looking down at our 13 camp. That's steep skiing. It was pretty icy, very much no fall zone in any direction. I think I'll hand it off to Dane here at this point.
All right. Yeah, descending from 13,000 feet on skis was definitely the sportiest skiing I've done in the however many 4 months that I had been on skis since February, where I transitioned from splitboarding. And I'm never going to forget from 13,000 feet that rollover as you just like are carefully skidding sideways on your edges, and it's just the abyss. You just see the ocean beneath you. But we ended up piecing it together pretty well, and we felt generally safe as long as we were slow and, you know, not doing big ambitious jump turns in the wrong places. The snow softened up a little bit as we got further down, and the trend was looking good, but unfortunately that trend kind of continued in that direction past the Hayden shoulder, and that was just warmer and slightly mushier snow as we got further and further down. Great shot of Charlie. This is looking off to the more of the westerly side of the range. Here's some weather data for reference. This nice graph that Chris found over on the left is actually red bars or blue bars that are above or below the daily median temperature average, specifically for Yakutat. And so that highest bar, we see the third one is this big kind of warm deviation from what's the average for that time of year, and that was the day we were literally retreating down the whole mountain. So it had been pretty warm the 2 previous days, and on that day we kind of got slammed with just hot conditions. We broke we broke a lot of warm weather records across the state and 3 in Yakutat in those basically consecutive days. But higher up on the mountain, the skiing was still great, so we didn't know how screwed we were at that point. We were enjoying our descent. We were on approach to kind of that final descent from the 10,000-foot bench where Super Cubs can land under certain conditions. That 2,000-foot descent down to our 8K camp, which is the top of the Milk Jug Couloir. But we're still making our way down here.
I don't have a photo of us getting slammed.
Hosed.
So we can pause it here, but
Doesn't look bad.
no, that's the good thing.
Okay, and we're below everything here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just gonna back up and kind of explain that my experience at around 3:30, 4 in the morning. We've been pushing for a long time. And okay, I'm gonna back up a little bit here. Between 10,000 feet and 8,000, we're skiing, the snow is getting mushier and mushier, and we start to kick off these wet slides, kind of wet slides that don't stop, they keep going. And we traverse over a little bit to a band of rocks, and we hunker down. It's 1 a.m., midnight, somewhere in there, and we have to wait it out for a couple hours because we know that 3 a.m. is the coldest time of the night. It's basically the temperature window we've depended on for most of the trip. And it took a lot longer than expected for the snow to slowly start to set up. So around 2 a.m., it's still mushy. There's a little bit more crust on top, and we're testing the snow for stability, and we start picking our way down slowly. We get down to that kind of 8,000-foot shoulder, which is the top of the Milk Jug Couloir, and everything looks different. We're looking off to the side of the mountain, and we can't yet see over the edge down past the Milk Jug Couloir to where the rest of the ascent is. But when we finally make our way over there across a matrix of brand new crevasses that have opened up, we look down, and that lower mountain is unrecognizable. The whole thing is just brown streaks from basically rock-rich avalanches that have come down from all different sides of this glacial field, and they've all run into each other. And at this point, we have to figure out, can we descend the way that we came up? So our strategy, I set up what I could for an anchor. It involved some pickets and digging to find kind of this icy shelf near the top of the couloir. And I rappelled down alone into the couloir to see how things looked, and it didn't look good. There was quite a bit of rock over kind of on the if you're looking up the couloir, like in the photo we saw before, there's just a giant hanging cliff face above, and kind of a steeper band of rock that parallels the top. So picking through that, kind of trying to make the decision about whether or not it's going to be feasible to look for rock pro in all this pretty chossy, friable type rock. Soon determining that that did not seem like a strategy that was going to work, I started swinging, or kind of like pendulum walking, back into what's kind of the main couloir zone. And with every step, I'm sinking up to my nipples. It's just bottomless isothermic mush. And there's a little bit of a crust on top, which is concerning because I realize it's so steep every time I sink through, that crust is supporting my back just enough to try to like flip me over. And we're imagining we have a single 60-meter rope. Our protection options are not looking good, and we have about like 1,500 or 1,000 so feet to descend, unprotected and with weight on our back. So I come back up and talk to these two gentlemen, and that was probably the most deflating part of that trip, is being so exhausted from all of the days leading up to that point, and realizing we don't have a lot of good options ahead of us. So we probably made the best decision, which was to go back up to our 8,000 foot camp and pitch the tent, go to sleep. That's what we did. And we didn't sleep well because the sun immediately came up like it does every day, and it just cooked us in our little fabric oven. So I think collectively, I don't know, we maybe got 90 minutes of sleep between the three of us. And we were nervously stirring and up and talking about what we should do, and talking about the other possible descent options. Of course, all the other two named routes that we know of are both going to be pretty snow dependent, and we're realizing we're running into the same issue on any one of these as we're descending rotten, unsupportable snow and on pretty steep aspects, and we're just basically hoping that things don't cut loose and we don't get sent down the mountain in a wet slide. And I think that's when discussion turns to, we all have in-reaches. Should we call for help? Should we hit the SOS button? Because that doesn't feel right. We're not in like a true emergency situation at this point. We have rations and fuel for another week. But there is a storm coming, and we're moving towards summer. The arc is not towards things getting colder and more frozen. So it seemed like every vein of information we had seemed to be pointing towards trying to get us out of there as quickly as possible. And so.
And the temps the night that we attempted
To descend, where the low temp was in the low 40s at that elevation. So, and we had one more night of clear weather on our forecast, with the low temp forecast at 47 degrees for 8,000 feet. And then after that, the storm coming was forecasted to rain to 10,000 feet. So our options looked fairly grim at hoping for things to improve. And as Dana had mentioned before, I wanted to add a couple of things too from our attempted descent. Things the night before never froze. And as Dane was rappelling down to check out the line, we looked across the valley, and a similar aspect Chris and I watched a wet slide drop down about 2,000 feet above us on a similar aspect naturally at about 3 in the morning. And our thoughts were, there's no way we can descend the Milk Jug Couloir safely. We'd already determined that Shell Ridge is not being a feasible option earlier, and certainly wasn't going to be better now with worsened snow conditions. And staring out the harbor route, we saw about 1,000 feet of 60-degree snow to lead us to rock, which hopefully would have been safer. So we felt like our options are pretty grim, and if we had a window to get out of there, it was going to be in the next 24 hours. So, yeah.
I will admit that of the three of us, I was probably the most resistant, I think, to come around to asking for help. But since you two were more primarily kind of coordinating with Isaac, who who ended up scrambling a R-66 to fly there from Valdez to help us out with our little problem. Did you want to talk at all about setting that up, or?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I guess we have like 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I think like first, the ridge that you guys saw the photo of at 10,000 feet is where the climb is more traditionally started, and it's broad and a Super Cub could land there. And so our first option was to talk to our pilot and see if the Super Cub could pick us up. And he said no, that it was landable, but he had clients. And so we can then turn to, well, okay, can we get another bump? And I think at this point, like all of us were pretty ashamed. Like we got ourselves in a pickle and we weren't really able to get out. I think I was like calculating odds in my head of falling on that isothermic snow in the couloir, and I think I put my chances of getting down that at about maybe 30%. And it was definitely a lethal fall, so that seemed like not great odds to me. So we kind of were weighing our pride with our low chances of success. And so basically our two options were to try to find a helicopter off or to ditch all of our gear and free solo with as little weight as we possibly could. Chris had our team had identified a rescue coordinator who kind of helped us figure out a ride, and it turned out being pretty feasible to get the helicopter to land up there. And so yeah, we ended up having a heli come to 10,000 feet, and the next morning we ended up climbing up that way. The low that night, like I said, was 47, so even getting up to 10 was a bit of a task through that kind of snow. We ended up kind of crawling on all fours up this maybe 50-degree snow slope to get up there, and luckily we were able to make it up, and the rest went pretty chill. In our head I was all worried about, I'm putting this guy at risk for picking us up, and then I get there and Al's our pilot, and Al's like the most stoked I've ever seen a pilot in his life landing on this ridge, and I'm getting ready to apologize to him, and he just hands me his GoPro and says, "Dude, this is sick. Put this forward." So Al had a great time, and Al just kind of took us on a little bump down to 3,000 feet, kind of bypassing the challenges of the climb. When we got down to 3, where our cache was, we had been gone for 5 days at that point, and we had cached our supplies about 6 to 8 feet deep in the snow when we left 5 days prior. And when we got back, the cache was sitting on the surface of the snow. So at least 6 to 8 feet had melted out in the 4 to 5 days we were gone. And that little tiny, I don't have any photos of this because I was holding Al's GoPro, but the little tiny rock step that we saw in the Milk Jug Couloir on the way up, that was like a single rock move, was about 100 feet of exposed rock with a waterfall running down the middle of it. So seeing that kind of really edified us that even if we had made it down 1,000 feet, there was no way we were going to make it down the way we had planned. So yeah, it was humbling. The rest of our trip went great. We had a great expedition back to the beach, had a bonfire. We cached some whiskey there. We were all happy to be alive. So it was nice. Looking back on things, we definitely made a lot of mistakes that got us into this pickle. I think we had all kind of appropriately identified melting as a risk. And we moved very quickly in the upper mountain. I mean, we only took 1 day to rest the whole trip. We acclimated for about maybe 12 hours before pushing to the summit. But, and so while we did discuss that as a possibility, what we didn't really plan for was the fact that, the other 3 routes, or other 2 routes that were available as to the descent, were susceptible to the same exact problem that we found in the Milk Jug. So they all faced southwest. They all had the same problem of 60-degree snow and some mix of snow and rock. And so when one was melted out, the other 2 were therefore also melted out and not really climbable. And so I don't think any of us realized this at the time, but we definitely left ourselves, we thought we were mitigating the hazard, but we ended up leaving ourselves really exposed, kind of with no backup option other than a free solo or some help. So I think that was my biggest takeaway. And I didn't discuss this much, but, we did have quite a long group talk and discussion about the prospect of melting, and we sat, we had what I thought was a pretty good process. We all kind of said our piece. We set a bunch of, we set some anchors and protection on the ice on the way down that we thought we'd be able to use on the way, or on our first descent to the milk jug. We thought we'd be able to use it on our second with our full gear. So we kind of like talked it through. We thought we had a good solution, and then it turns out we didn't. And so I think my other takeaway is you can talk about something and you can have a group decision, and even though the process is good, the outcome isn't always good. So a good process kind of produced a bad decision, and it's kind of hard to grapple with that sometimes, and hard to learn from that, because I feel like our process was there, but the decision was still poor. So the outcomes of those decisions really matters. We all feel pretty lucky that we, maybe 30 years ago we would have probably had to make that descent ourselves, but we were really thankful not to have had to do that. So, yeah, those are the end of my thoughts.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're out of time.
No, that's good.
That's a great point.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for coming. And let's have another round of applause both for Dr. Sturm and for Charlie Dane. We're going to clean up really quick and get all the tables back in here. We are supposed to be out right now, but we encourage everyone to bounce across the street, perhaps in the Institute, or make more plans in the lobby. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate you guys, and we hope to see you guys next month. Thanks. Bye.